Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with himself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 27th of August 2024. Lots of news happening. I'm trying to make my video shorter and then everything happens all at once and my videos are getting longer. I've got to try and also write a reprise to an feature article I wrote on gene therapy. I've got to do that for the reboot of Only Sky today if I can. Goodness me, busy. Anyway, here is the military aid. Probably going to have to be a separate video on the military aid and equipment and assistance to Ukraine and indeed for Russia. We'll start with here Francois Eisberg saying apparently Ukraine will receive 6 more Dutch F-16s than originally planned, with an eventual total of 30 instead of 24 that was originally thought to be coming from the Netherlands. This is in light also of the fact that Zelensky has today claimed that F-16s were involved in shooting down missiles last night and possibly the night before in those big waves of attack that have seen Ukraine on the back foot in terms of energy infrastructure and critical infrastructure being hit by those Russian ordnance. It's really important that F-16s can add to the repertoire of things that Ukraine can use to defend its country really from Russian attacks. I don't know that we've seen F-16s being used in an offensive role yet, although there have been claims to have seen them over Odessa. That could have been in a defensive mode as well. Now, during a speech, there's quite a lot that's come out of this a speech that Zelensky's just given. He talks quite a bit about Kursk, about how it's part of a political diplomatic sort of approach to the war, as well as being a military operation. During the speech, Zelensky confirmed the use of F-16s to shoot down missiles during a recent Russian missile attack and highlighted key points. Ukraine successfully tested a ballistic missile, and this is the main point of my next part here. Also plans to present a victory strategy to US leaders. That's supposed to be in September. Halted Russian advances in Kharkiv and Sumy by attacking into Kursk, and refuses to sign a gas transit deal with Russia and is committed to reclaiming its territories without compromising negotiations. So it's a really big set of claims that came out of this speech that Zelensky's just given, or an interview he's just given. Now, as mentioned, Ukraine has conducted successful tests of its own ballistic missile. According to Zelensky, no one will sign a contract with Russia regarding continuation transit of gas through Ukraine. This is the end. So that's significant, and obviously Hungary and Slovakia are going to have to say something about that. So some people are now talking about, well, what is this ballistic missile? It's a domestically produced one, which is great because it means it can be used to attack into Russia without having restrictions imposed upon it or them. Now, there are some people thinking, as Osin Technical here says, it could be Hrim 2. The Hrim 2 missile, I think does that mean Thunder? Is a missile that has potentially been used before by the Ukrainians. It's been in development since 2014 as a ballistic missile, and there were thoughts that it might have been responsible for one of the strikes on the Kerch Bridge earlier on in the war, but that was just a rumor. It might have been used a number of times, but it could be that Ukraine is soon going to be able to use a range of weapons to strike at Russia proper. And that means that air bases and critical infrastructure inside Russia could be under threat. Now, after a massive Russian attack on the energy sector in Ukraine, the head of EU diplomacy, so that's Joseph Borrell, called for the lifting of all current restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range Western weapons to strike Russian military targets. He underlined that this would secure people's lives and reduce destruction in Ukraine. Joseph Borrell, I mean, I know he wasn't the most popular politician, I think, when he's a Spanish politician, I believe, involved in Spanish politics, but he's definitely doing a great job with regard to supporting Ukraine from within the EU. He said Russia escalated its aggression with renewed massive attacks across Ukraine, targeting civilian infrastructure, including hydroelectric stations, and causing casualties. Ukraine needs air defense now. I will discuss this with Dmytro Kuleba, so that's the Ukrainian foreign minister, and EU foreign ministers at the informal FAC on Thursday. I reiterate that lifting restrictions on the use of capabilities against versus the Russian military involved in aggression against Ukraine in accordance with international law would strengthen Ukrainian self-defense, save lives, and reduce destruction in Ukraine. Really important rhetoric there from Borrell. Okay, now this is what Alex Rafuglu says with regard to Zelensky's renewed call for the US to lift restrictions. And we are hearing that the Ukrainians are going to approach the US and give them a list of targets that they would like to be able to hit, like a very explicit list of targets. And I guess this is like calling the bluff of the Americans by saying, look, why wouldn't you want us to hit these things? Really? I mean, we've hit some of these things with our own indigenous weaponry already. Like, what's your issue here? Are you seriously still worried about these red lines and escalation? Well, the White House had reacted yesterday to these renewed calls. John Kirby, the National Security Advisor, said, "This is not a new desire by Zelensky by any stretch. He's made his concerns known to us privately, and he's certainly made his concerns known to everybody publicly." Ouch. And we understand why he's doing that. His country's under attack. But as I've said many, many times, we'll keep the conversations with the Ukrainians going, but we're going to keep it private. And I have no changes to our policies with respect to US weapons to speak to today, no guidelines to talk to. Okay, two things to mention here. One is evidently there's no change by the Americans, and that's a real shame. But the other thing I think is super important, and I think the US are right in this, which is not declaring these things publicly. My opinion, if I was the Americans and I was worried about escalation, but also wanted to help out Ukraine more, I would say things like this to Ukraine. I say, right, at the moment, you are able to fire, 90 kilometers into Russia. Okay, we're willing to, don't tell anyone, just nobody announce this, but instead of 90 kilometers, how about 120 kilometers? So you can add another 30 kilometers to that, see what you can hit. Don't tell anyone, but just quietly go about your business of using HIMARS to strike targets a little bit deeper. And then maybe in a month's time, say 130, how about 150 now? Just keep edging more into Russia with the range of those Western supplied weapons, but never admit anything publicly. And I don't know why. I mean, maybe that is happening. Maybe stuff is happening that we don't know about. But that would be how I would navigate that line between anti-escalation and giving Ukraine exactly what they want, if I was more worried about escalation than I personally am. So yeah, I think there is a really important call there from Kirby to say, look, we're going to keep these talks private, and I think those talks should be private. There's a time and a place for transparency in announcing things, but sometimes I think things are announced too publicly and too often. US government is sending equipment to Ukraine to repair energy infrastructure and increase its resilience, said Joe Biden in a statement. So the Americans are very cognizant of the huge damage and the huge threat that these waves of missiles and drones have caused to Ukraine. And so Biden has at least come out and stated that the US will support in this way, but it is a sticking plaster, isn't it? Why bother spending money fixing stuff up rather than spending money on not allowing that to happen in the first place? It's far cheaper to allow the Ukrainians to hit at those air bases, to take out the Russian capability to do these strikes in the first place. It's the wrong way around of doing things, but nonetheless, it's good that they are going to help. But it's just, I think it's an inefficient way to assist Ukraine. Now, talking about, I've spoken many times, and I indeed spoke about this yesterday when I talked about the sheer number of Bradleys and Abrams tanks that the Americans have sitting in fields. And I don't think people understand the sheer volume of vehicles they have. And here's a great example. So this is an aircraft boneyard in the US. The number of aircraft is unbelievable. What is more unbelievable is how many functioning aircraft the US could send to Ukraine but does not. And I know there will be Americans that say, why do you always talk about the Americans, and it's not just up to us to, I get that. However, it is only the Americans that have this amount of kit. Just look at that amount of kit sitting there. Just blows my mind that you can have that much equipment and then still say, yeah, no, we're not going to send this or that to Ukraine. In fact, if we say Bradley's desert storage, let's see what the internet throws up in terms of the storage in the US deserts, and see if there are some of the So this is the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Just the sheer volume of equipment that you can see on offer. That's just that looks like M113's tank. I mean, goodness knows. But there are so many of these images that you can go and find of American Bradleys, just absolutely just huge quantities of them in different places just look at this. Insane. The numbers are insane. Sitting in the desert, often that's actually just going abroad there, but so often you have lines of these sitting in the desert. People have said that, I've driven past some of these and they're just absolutely incredible numbers of pieces of equipment that the Americans have. So it is not incumbent upon the US on their own to help out Ukraine, but they are the only nation in the position of being able to help out Ukraine immediately or almost immediately, to the tune of vast numbers of equipment where other nations just simply are not in a position to do so. And now you can have a go at other nations for not spending money on defense and for doing this and for doing that. Okay, brilliant. Yep, go for it. However, right now, that's irrelevant. Right now, how can Ukraine be helped? And I'm sure that they can, with quite a lot more equipment that would not at all harm the US defensive capabilities for themselves at all. These are vehicles that are essentially semi-obsolete, sitting out in deserts where you hope that they don't rust as much, and that's why you put them in the desert. Given operational requirements, says John Ridge, part of the Touchney team, and material exploitation risks, it's very unlikely that the US will provide JASSM ERs. So these are the longer range cruise missiles that the US could provide for use on the F-16s. However, he's saying it's unlikely that they'll provide those. There's been a lot of talk about whether they'll get cruise missiles from the US. If the US are not allowing Storm Shadows to be used into Russia, then they're not going to allow JASSMs to be used into Russia, in which case you'd only be able to use these into occupied territories. You're thinking, well, do they have enough Storm Shadows? It is. There are arguments, obviously, concerning whether they will get these or not. The best option for Ukraine and partners is to heavily invest in indigenous Ukrainian cruise missiles. So this is where we're talking about those ballistic missiles I've already mentioned, plus the Palyantsia jet-propelled missile drones, who are effectively cruise missiles. Yeah, we could give you a load of these missiles, or we could help you produce your own, either through financial or technological assistance. To help Ukrainian cruise missiles in the 250 to 500 kilogram effects class and a 1,500 plus kilometer range class. He goes on to say, I don't know if he says it here, in another tweet, he goes on to say that the one way that you might end up getting JASSMs to Ukraine is through military financing, through sort of not giving them out of presidential drawdown authority, but maybe making some sales to Ukraine, not even from the USAI, which is ordering on behalf of Ukraine, but selling them to Ukraine might be an option. Military aid to Ukraine, but from Jeff, who Jeff2416, this Belgium handle, he does a bit of an Oryx thing. The military aid to Ukraine from, let's have a look, that is Croatia. They've given an AN-32B, another one, light cargo aircraft, the second of two that were pledged. So that's going to be useful for the Ukrainians there. Thank you, Croatia. Russian channels are mentioning the use by Ukrainians of improved Baba Yaga, these big hexacopter, sometimes oxycopter drones, with armoured plates in the Kursk bridgehead. So far, small arms fire has been quite effective against Baba Yaga due to its relatively slow pace. So it's not only bigger, not only are the Baba Yagas bigger, but they are noisier, and therefore being bigger and noisier, they're easier to spot and easier to shoot down. So they are susceptible. That's why they are often used at night. They are susceptible to small arms fire. But Ukrainians are looking for ways to improve it, as it's very effective. So they are armor plating these. The enemy is using Baba Yaga drone. The Ukrainian armed forces have improved it, and now it's covered with armor plates. The enemy is trying to probe the settlement of Komarovka. Our artillery and aviation are working closely. Ukrainian armed forces continue to hit the crossings. Our FPV operators are excellent at hitting enemy equipment and personnel. The enemy has not been allowed to roll into the Malaya Lokinia yet. Well, that's where the prison is that they supposedly are in control of, so I don't know how accurate any of those claims are, but interesting that the Russians claiming that their FPV drones are having success up in Kursk. And you'd imagine they would, because at the end of the day, the Ukrainians are going to be covering that whole area with equipment and personnel. And so there will be an awful lot of targets for Russian drone operators. Okay, the same source says, sorry, not to the last one, but the one before, Jeff 2416. Ukrainian military pages reports that the Ukrainian military has initiated the formation of at least 2 brigades in the 16 times designation range. These units will be made up out of Ukrainians currently living outside of Ukraine, with, for example, Poland and Czechia having previously stated their intention to aid in the recruitment of such units. So that is people who are living outside of Ukraine who might want to help, but they've got their lives sorted in say, Czechia or Poland, and those governments and MODs are providing or are putting together units of Ukrainians for the war in Ukraine from these diaspora communities of people who are willing to do that, rather than forcing them back to Ukraine, or Ukraine enticing those people back to Ukraine and sorting them all out in Ukraine. There is you're going to be trained really well, as well as we would train our own troops, and we're going to do that, maybe take a little bit more time than rushing through other Ukrainian units, and so it gives you the confidence that you're going to be in a decent unit, and then you'll go back and support in Ukraine. Per Katerina Chernohorenko, Deputy Minister of Defense, around 83,500 Ukrainian citizens living abroad have had their military registration information updated through the Reserve Plus platform. So I haven't actually talked about this, but a couple of things happened recently, which is that Ukraine is an amazing country in terms of digitalizing their infrastructure, their governance, if you like. And for example, there's an app where you can do everything from pay your car tax to sorting out your TV license or whatever. I'm making this up, but you can do pretty much everything through these centralized apps that are really, really effective. Now I know some people are like, information, GDPR, or I don't want privacy, I want privacy, etc., but actually Ukraine have done a really good job, especially useful in times of war when paperwork and having to go into offices and things, this is all a bit more difficult. And so having these apps to do this bureaucracy is really efficient. They've improved the apps, or they've created apps in order for you to be able to register remotely for military service or whatever. So it's just making everything much more streamlined and efficient. And there's been this Reserve Plus platform that allows people from abroad to register for national service and log where you're at, and etc. Formation of further brigades in the 16 times range, I don't quite know what that means, is expected to follow in the near future. So good news there. Ukraine is forming new mechanized brigades, according to Forbes, which shows that the country does not expect the war with Russia to end soon. According to Forbes, the creation of these brigades depends on successful mobilization and foreign aid. According to Military Land, the training of the new brigades will take place abroad. So it's different to what we were just talking about. These aren't necessarily diaspora communities forming brigades abroad, but brigades being formed in Ukraine and then sent abroad to train. And many recruits are planned to be recruited among Ukrainians living in other countries. And then there's what we're talking about. So that's coming at it from both sides there. Ukraine needs to, but the point of the article is that Ukraine are still putting up these brigades and forming them means that they are looking to the future, and it isn't, this war is, they're in this for the long haul. Ukraine needs to mobilize enough soldiers to make up for the losses and create new units. This is a daunting task for a country with a population of 38 million, which already maintains an army of about 1 million, Forbes has noted. So there is that. Russian Defense Ministry themselves have started recruiting Indonesians for the war with Ukraine. Right, this is worthy of note in terms of... right, I've got some geopolitical stuff here that includes something on Indonesia. Where are you? Here it is. I think it's here. Yes, so China, Brazil, Indonesia, and South Africa. So this is like BRICS, but instead of India, it has Indonesia. So Brazil is Brazil, Russia, China, India, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? Here we have a report that's widespread at the moment that China, Brazil, Indonesia, and South Africa are urging global support for their new, so they together, without India, but with Indonesia, for their new peace plan aimed at resolving the conflict in Ukraine, as they call it. Li Hui, China's special representative on Eurasian affairs, believes that increased support for this plan would enhance the prospects for de-escalation and peace. The plan includes principles such as ceasing hostilities, protecting civilians, avoiding weapons of mass destruction, and supporting international cooperation. While China has not attended the Global Peace Summit, it claims that 110 countries support its plan. Right, so now you've got this alternative peace plan, but it's being sorted out by countries that are otherwise associated with or aligned with Russia, and that is slightly worrying. And then at the same time as Indonesia is involved in this peace plan, you seem to have Indonesians being recruited by Russia. So recently, the Armenian battalion Arbat, which is part of Piatnachka International Brigade, announced the recruitment of volunteers from Indonesia. The training of the recruits will take place in the occupied part of Donetsk. Also attached in the post is a video, presumably with 3 Indonesian citizens, saying Arbat is power. After the invasion of Ukraine, Nepalese citizens also began to sign contracts with the Russian army more frequently. Nova Europe's special correspondent Irina Kravtsova has visited the South Asian country and told how the poor were seduced by easy money and then paid for it. I presume they pay for it with their lives rather than being paid for that recruitment in the money there. But this is Russia continuing to do crypto mobilization, being able to recruit people other than Russian citizens, and thus, if they lose those people, they're not too bothered. That is how they're rolling. Russia redeploys 30,000 troops to Kursk Oblast amid Ukraine's incursion, according to General Syrsky. So the commander-in-chief saying that actually Russia has moved an awful lot of troops, and that's why Ukraine will be much slower in their gains in the Kursk region, but that's exactly what they were expecting. And the success has been that it is supposedly attracted 30,000 troops. Now, as mentioned, that hasn't been the case that they've been taken from Pokrovsk. So the areas where Russia have been most successful, they have been reinforcing. But actually, if you look at Kharkiv Oblast, there's been no change there since the Kursk incursion started. So there have been these, and Chasiv Yar as well. So Kursk has had some really big successes in terms of stopping Russia succeeding and gaining territory in key places along the front line. You know, Kharkiv was a real worry. The Ukrainians did a good job of stopping that, or at least slowing it and reversing it in some places. But the main stasis has resulted from the Kursk incursion and a movement of troops from, say, Vovchansk for the Russians to Kursk. And then finally, this isn't to do with not at least prima facie to do with the war in Ukraine, but it's a kind of sign of the militarization of Europe in terms of the threat that Russia provides. And we've seen this in terms of the change to conscription in Denmark and in some of the possibly Nordic countries, and particularly in the Baltics. Here, Latvia is planning to conscript women into the army from 2028. This was announced by Latvian Defence Minister Andris Spruds, and now the adaptation of equipment and uniforms will begin in the Republic. The reason for such a decision was the demographic situation in the country. The authorities fear that it will not be possible to recruit 4,000 people for the armed forces. It's the same with Ukraine. Like in days of national security challenges, and in also days when people are not so forthcoming to join the armed forces, you need to change the way that you are appealing to these people, and also change the demographics from which you can take these people or attract these people. So, okay, if we are cutting off 50% of the population from recruitment, from conscription, then we need to open that up, and we need to understand that, women can do most, if not all, of the jobs that men can do to similar degrees that men can. There obviously will be certain jobs that men, on average, being stronger or whatever, might be more able to do. Right. But in general, there are going to be, and I don't want to get into a big gender argument here, but it seems incredibly sensible that most nations entertain better the notion of recruiting women. Ukraine are desperately going to need to do this, and they are doing this. And we've seen now recently mobile air defense teams made up entirely of women. Exactly one of the things that I suggested earlier on in the war. You need to come at these problems with alternatives and solutions that are, contextualized by the position you're in. And Ukraine desperately need boots on the ground. They desperately need recruitment, and women are going to help big time in that. Okay, hopefully that was of use and interest to you. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate all of my members. Thank you so much for your kindness and for being part of this community. I'm so sorry I don't interact enough on, say, Discord. Please come and join the Discord community, by the way, where you can share things and talk about matters that we discuss here. The link is below, but I know I don't do certain things. I don't have time to do. For example, a lot more fundraising, something I wish I could do. And I'm trying to sort out this NAFO truck with JR, but there are just communication issues and obstacles at the moment. It is hopefully happening. But in the meantime, please give kindly to all the great fundraising projects that are out there, and there are so many, and you can go and find them yourselves. But I've been saying recently, Constantine through Andrew Perpetua's channel is raising money for excavators for building fortifications, which is, I think, really important, and all the many other ones that are out there, United 24, and of course all the normal ones too. Anyway, take care guys, and speak soon.